It must have been torturous and pure agony for the young Amerigo to watch the other children swim and play in the deep water when he could not, simply because they, nor his parents, were willing or able to teach him how to swim. Then one day, an extra mean peasant child mocked Vespucci because he couldn't swim, and then reminded him that meant he could never be a sailor and never become a famous explorer. Because Grandma's right, a smooth sea never made a skilled seaman. So the young Amerigo is said to have become enraged, and with defiance in his voice, shouted back at the mean peasant child, "Ha! The parables of the ancients need not apply to me." Being teased by that mean peasant child must have been an important catalyst in the young life of little Amerigo, for it seems from that day forward, he was on an unstoppable quest to prove that extra mean peasant child wrong, and to prove to the rest of the world that he could still be a sailor and still become famous explorer. Although details during this period of Amerigo's life are scarce, it appears the path of Amerigo did indeed begin to diverge shortly after his torment by the mean peasant girl. This would explain why the career path of Amerigo was so different from that of his two older brothers, Antonio and Girolamo, who coincidentally were excellent swimmers. Antonio completed his education at the University of Pisa and followed the same path as their father and became a notary. His other brother, Girolamo, also completed his formal education and then entered the Knights Templars, the Catholic military order, in Rhodes. Amerigo's path's divergence so early in life seems near proof that men are born trailblazers and explorers and not made like the peasant child told him. How else explains Amerigo? It appears adolescent Amerigo must have struggled in the classroom or in whatever room his uncle chose to give lessons. This would explain why he and his other classmate, Lorenzo di Pierfrancesco de' Medici, could be taught together in the same class when Amerigo was 10 years older. One can only assume that when the young Amerigo had to sit there and wait patiently for his uncle to teach his much younger classmate Lorenzo how to correctly pronounce his letters and his silent letters, that young Amerigo must have spent many hours in that classroom just dreaming of doing anything else. He must have felt like a caged bird, just dreaming of the day he could spread his wings and fly. And as we all know, one day, fly he would. Oh yes, fly he would. With a fresh degree in hand from his uncle's prestigious home school, and when most young birds first spread their wings, Amerigo, for reasons unknown, did not. Amerigo's parents acted contrary to the natural world, in which the mama or papa bird will eventually shove the timid young bird from the nest in order to teach him that last and most important lesson of fly or die. Conversely, Amerigo never got that shove. Therefore, Amerigo continued living at home in order to help his father, the notary, and in his downtime, he is believed to have begun the difficult task of teaching himself transoceanic navigation without the aid of neither the ocean nor a vessel of any kind. Historians, however, are certain that Amerigo did have access to a bathtub. It must not have taken him long to figure that all out and move on to the more complicated disciplines of geodesy and a complete understanding of the cosmos. Unfortunately, Amerigo was born under a bad moon, and during a period of time filled with uncertainty, caused almost entirely by societal uncleanliness, greed, and a poison-to-power form of politics that was ruled by the largest and most powerful religious machine ever produced, the Roman Catholic Church. During this time, the Catholic monarchs, Isabella and Ferdinand, were the puppets, while the Pope and the Vatican were the puppet masters. This period of time is now referred to by many pseudoscientists as the time of Pesquis. Ancient astronaut theorists define the Pesquis as a period of time unique to Europe during the 15th to 17th century, when and where disease ran rampant and eventually spread to the rest of the world on ships via sick crew members. During this period, Europe was engulfed in near-constant intermittent pandemic, in addition to widespread and perpetual dysentery, believed at the time to have been caused by the wrath of God. However, it is now known that the Pesquis were simply a result of the poor quality of water caused by the now-defunct local ordinance and Medici family mandate, referred to today as the old shit and piss anywhere rule. In England, they too had yet to repeal the old shit and piss anywhere law, and instead substituted beer for water in their daily hydration regimen, which miraculously cured the dysentery of those who God did not want to punish. Unfortunately for the beer companies, it wasn't too long until a wise local man figured it all out. Some 337 years later, a local man figured out all by himself that he didn't have buy and drink beer every day in order to survive, and that just boiling the river water before he drank it cured his painful and perpetually bloody stool squirts. This in turn made his wife even more happy and proud, because while she loved him dearly, she was growing ever more tired of cleaning his trousers every time it happened again. As a result of the pesties, there were many months, if not many years, during which Amerigo and other members of his noble class would find refuge in one of their many villas in the countryside of Tuscany, adjacent to the grapevines and the wineries, where there were no filthy peasants for God to punish. Then in 1482, Amerigo's father passes away after a quick bout with a mysterious illness, recorded in the notes of the autopsy performed by Dr. Cinskas, the long-serving personal Medici family physician. In the autopsy, Dr. Cinskas recorded the cause of death as undetermined, however, with a side note reading, but unequivocally not the wrath of God. This unfortunate and unexpected turn of events may have forced the now 28-year-old Amerigo to finally leave the nest and embark on his own journey down a path yet undecided. Ironically, it would be the same Lorenzo Medici, the second grader, who would ultimately become Amerigo's very first employer, or boss. It must have been difficult for Amerigo to take orders from little Leo, clean up after his messes, be available at any time, pretend play centaur as Leo liked, and become completely submissive to the 18-year-old who was now the newest and youngest boss in the Medici family. The Medici family was known to all the citizens of the province of Florence as simply the rulers. Technically, they were de facto rulers, or Grand Dukes, no different than a king, which the Medici family held nearly exclusively for over 200 years, from 1434 to 1670. The Medici family also created, owned and operated the Medici Bank from 1397 until its default in 1499. The Medici Bank was the largest and most respected bank in all of Europe during that time. In addition, the Medici family also produced 4 popes, Leo X, Clement VII, Pius IV, and Leo XVIII, who served for a combined 26 years, between the years of 1513 to 1605. Nevertheless, this period of Amerigo's life, however difficult, must have taught him a great lesson in resilience, and inevitably must have taught him those great leadership skills necessary to become a noteworthy explorer. In 1488, Lorenzo, the boss, sent Vespucci on his very first mission to investigate a replacement for his Seville business agent, Tommaso Capone. Although the paper trail runs dry, what we do know is that Tommaso Capone immediately returns to Florence. Meanwhile, another Florentian, Donato Berardi, becomes the new business agent representing the Medici family and the Medici Bank in Seville. Then, in 1492, for reasons unknown, Amerigo relocates abroad, to no other than Seville, Spain. He also curiously begins to sign his name in various new forms like Albericus Vespucius, Amerigo Vespucci, and even once as simply Vespucci. In all, historians have discovered 19 different spellings of this man's given name, and 6 different variants of his surname recorded in at least 6 different countries or kingdoms. While he continues to fulfill his duties as household manager for the Medici family from abroad, he becomes more involved with the new hotshot business agent, Mr. Berardi, while in Seville. Agent Berardi had become a celebrity and a pioneer in the re-emerging African slave trade, and in his ship chandlery business in Seville and down the coast of Africa. In addition, Mr. Berardi was one of the very few investors who was willing to provide investment, support, and provisions for that famous 1492 voyage of the man who would become Amerigo's arch-enemy, Cristobal Colon, or, as the English know him, Christopher Columbus. There is still no consensus amongst historians as to why a respected businessman like Mr. Berardi would have agreed to financially support a voyage to a distant land, led by an unknown captain from Genoa, partly owned and operated by a family of Afro-Spanish sailors, in 3 worn-out ships of modest size and of the kind that can only be described as second-hand, if not third or more. In addition, due to the size and condition of the vessels, as well as the anonymity of Colon and his Afro-Spanish officers, finding a crew turned out to be quite a challenge. It seems it was not easy to convince local seamen to embark on a voyage to the most distant land known Asia, via a route diametrically opposite to the proven and known route to Asia. Even more unfortunate for Colon was that he had another problem, a language problem. You see the word for Asia, or the Far East, in the local language of Palos de la Frontera in Spain, literally translated as the land of the rising sun most distant, and the word for the cardinal direction west, literally translates as the direction of the setting sun. Therefore, Colon had a problem convincing local sailors to join him on a voyage to the land of the rising sun via the direction of the setting sun. Columbus, as a foreign national, and the Nino brothers, of mixed Afro-Spanish ancestry, who nonetheless chose to be involved in the Africa-Spain slave trade, made it more difficult to convince local Spanish sailors to embark on a voyage of unknown distance and therefore unknown duration to the furthest place known to the Old World. However, Colon must have been a charismatic guy and ensured them that heading west was a shortcut he had conjured up in a dream by the grace of God. A few years earlier that night, he stayed at the Holiday Inn Expressa Hotel just off Western Boulevard in Rome. The Nino brothers must have figured out how to exploit their envious position as mixed Afro-Spaniards in the slave labor and human property exchange markets of Africa and Spain. They must have figured out how to exploit the inherent advantages of being smack dab in the middle of the human being/slave animal spectrum. Clearly, they were able to avoid the hang-ups of empathy that is normally associated with our species, as well as many other less evolved species, like dogs and dolphins. There is no doubt that Agent Berardi, with the aid of his new friend, Albericus's boss, and his political power as de facto rulers of Florence, whom also held significant power in the Catholic Church. Together, they were able to pull enough strings that resulted in a special arrangement in order to get enough crew members needed to steer and operate the old vessels using what has often been called the most demanding sailing rig ever invented. The dreaded square-jerried Storcho rig. For those of you who aren't sailors, the Storcho sail derives its name from a correctly spelled acronym, Storcho, which stands for any sail that has a resemblance to a square, triangle, octagon, rectangle, circle, hexagon, or any other shape, constructed of any material available, held together by whatever means necessary, that can be configured in any arrangement needed, and raised in whatever formation that permits the ship to arrive before all the ship's provisions expire or before the expiration of its crew members, excluding the dogs. The Storcho sail is believed by most seamen to be the first sailing rig ever invented. It appears to have even been used on occasion by Neanderthals more than 40,000 years ago. There is no doubt that the special arrangement, most often associated with Agent Berardi, was undoubtedly the brainchild of the sagacious genius, Amerigo himself. For the special arrangement involved the conditional release of prisoners from the local jail, whom would be granted amnesty by the Spanish sovereigns if they would simply sign up and could regain their freedom under one condition: debark on one of those old dilapidated boats westbound with those strangers, for a duration of time undeterminable, to a destination yet unknown, for a reason unclear. However, we assure you, unequivocally, we packed sufficient food and water, and they will not sell you into slavery. Despite offering this get-out-of-jail free card to every prisoner at the cafeteria of the local prison, known locally as the Stench, there were no takers. Clearly, it must have been xenophobia due of the Nino brothers. Eventually, they did as the airlines do today and had to resort to offering increasing sums of money. And eventually, they were able to seal the deal once offering prostitutes as a kicker. Eventually, they were able to get the total number of crew members required, which included 3, just to steer the rudder, and an estimated 34 more to handle the 3-masted square-jerried Storcho sails on the La Gallega, or the Santa Maria as we now know it by its Latinized name, in addition, of course, to Chief Pilot Nino and Governor Colon. The special arrangement turns out to have been a great call by the offensive coordinator of Medici Squad, the Puppet Masters, formerly known as the Child Molesters. This gave Colon an edge over his nemesis, and unfortunately prevented Albericus from getting all the glory. Colon, the athlete, didn't believe in stretching, so he ignored the advice of the old retired sailors, and therefore he decided to skip tryouts, skip training camp, and skip even a basic swim test, something a typical captain might desire. As Captain Forrest Gump once explained to me, in the middle of the ocean, 1, a non-swimmer is 10,000 times more likely to drown than a good swimmer. 2, a non-swimmer is 10,000 times more likely to panic due to his fear of drowning than a good swimmer. 3, a non-swimmer is 10,000 times more likely to be incapable of assisting the captain in times of distress due to his state of panic caused by his fear of drowning than a good swimmer. 4. A non-swimmer is 10. 0 times more likely, in the event of a capsize, to be directly responsible for the death of the captain or a good swimmer crew member, because the non-swimmer would not let go of the captain or the good swimmer crew member, causing both to drown, than a good swimmer. Therefore, since 99% of the job of a transoceanic crew member occurs over deep water, most captains would prefer anyone with a classification above non-swimmer, including a floater or even a person with a life jacket. Unfortunately, the Europeans would not learn about a life jacket until they discovered the Americas and the Indians showed them their invention. Regrettably, the Europeans believed God was a better life jacket than the Indians' personal flotation device. The Indians, however, insisted that their device, however bulky, awkward, uncomfortable, and unfashionable, had saved more lives in the ocean than any god they had ever heard of. Colin and his European crew agreed to disagree. Interestingly, the Indians also taught the Europeans the concept of quarantining, and that many of the illness that they had brought with them were transmitted through the air and through the wind. The Europeans again told the Indians they were incorrect, and that there was no need to quarantine, because illness was caused by the wrath of God. This time the Indians did not agree to disagree, however, the Europeans did not care. We now know Amerigo must have somehow cracked the code of cosmography, and that his sagacious genius was apparently the product of a supernatural brain. Apparently his brain was something more analogous to a modern supercomputer, for it would have been required, in order to have been able to perform a complete terrestrial, nautical, and celestial survey of more than 87%. First, Vespucci fraud 1 worksheet, 87%, route Atlantic coast America, of the entire Atlantic coastline of the New World, relying entirely on his incredible memory and a few sheets of paper. Then draw it all out when he got back to Portugal or Spain, due to the strike at the pencil factory and the paper embargo of 1496. His only other aid being his trusty cosmography book that his Aunt Kycris gave him for birthday number 5. Ask yourself, could you go on a 7-year carnival cruise to a foreign land and then come back and remember every square inch like it was the back of your hand or your childhood home? I don't think so. Albertuccio was blessed with a supercomputer for a brain that must have been complete with a 4K photographic memory and a hard drive of unlimited capacity. During Amerigo's illustrious 7-year seafaring career as assistant pilot's assistant and eager passenger, he is credited as participating in, or thought to have participated in, 4 transatlantic voyages to and from the New World, totaling a mind-boggling 56,514 miles. Unfortunately, due to the paper shortage of 1496, Vespucci was only able to take notes on his 3rd voyage when he was afforded some precious paper and a pencil. That is, if we are to assume that the sagacious genius and former assistant blank clerk didn't have a secret stash of precious paper that he had acquired over time from the rubbish bin at the bank where he had been employed all those years. On that 3rd voyage, when he was afforded some precious paper, he took meticulous notes of a kind never seen before. On just a few sheets of paper, he created science, rewrote history, and even became an inventor. On those few precious sheets of paper, he recorded everything. Nothing more laborious than the wave count, where he tallied a total of 1,223,774,656 waves passed on his 3rd voyage alone. Members of that crew say he was able to tally waves even in his sleep, just as the dolphin will kick his tail for each and every passing wave during its rare times of slumber. He also recorded on the side a total 1,342 boat waves, 5 whale waves, and 1 wave recorded as a dingbat, undoubtedly some sort of sea monster. Clearly, these additional wave tallies were subtracted from the total number of waves for the purpose of even more accuracy. Pure genius. His wave tally proved far superior to the bubble count used by the Portuguese. There is no doubt that Americus's mind-numbing attention to detail, combined with his incredible work ethic, were what allowed him to tabulate a new and accurate figure, or estimate as to the diameter of our planet Earth within 50 miles of its actual diameter, or within 1% error. Emmerich had done what no one person, or even civilization of any kind, in the old world had ever done before him, which was to estimate accurately the diameter of our box Earth. His arch-enemy Colin's figure was off by more than 25%. Ask yourself a question. Who do you want with the basketball with 3 seconds left in the game? Tied. The man who misses once every 4 shots, Or the ringer, the man who misses only once every 100 shots? Fly, he would. Oh yes, fly he would. From the get-go, Americus displayed a superior attention to detail and a never-before-seen ability to improvise, improve, and invent, despite sailing and being in the ocean for the very first time. The more experienced chief pilot Francisco Nunca Choco and his longtime assistant pilot, Rara Chocan, must have grown quite envious of the 51-year-old greenhorn guru, whom most of the crew begrudgingly referred to as Note Levantes, Pacay Ake, or Pesa Muerto, and by the others simply as the banker or the guy. How he invented the lunar distance method of celestial navigation, we will never know due to that unfortunate paper shortage. One can only assume that while he was engaged in his second most laborious task, the cloud count, that he may have had an idea that would not require the demands of counting every passing wave and cloud. When the great Italian explorer finally returned from his triumphant ultimate voyage to and from the New World, he arrived back first in Spain, and the people went wild. People from all around crowded in like sardines by the portside, just to get a glimpse of the brave man everyone was talking about who had become their hero. To them, and later to the rest of the world, he was glorious, almost more God than man. Realizing this, King Ferdinand II of Aragon immediately issued the Italian Amerigo, a royal decree granting him Spanish citizenship right then and there in honor of his discoveries. A few days later, on March 20, 1508, King Ferdinand II of Aragon also appoints Amerigo as pilot major, a newly created position, as head of Spain's navy, where he would go on to found and lead Spain's first school for navigators in Seville's Casa de Contracción, the Spanish equivalent of the U.S. Naval Academy. Who knows what would have become of Amerigo had the other children or his parents succeeded in teaching him how to swim. Maybe, just maybe, he would have had enough time for an even greater voyage, a voyage to explore the cosmos themselves. Maybe today the entire cosmos would be known as the Amerikiosmos. Maybe the Big Bang would be known as the Americi Bang Bang. Who knows? There may have never been a Charles Darwin, Orville Wright, or Buzz Aldridge because they were born too many years after the great Amerique. Many prefer to give Copernicus and Galileo credit for a heliocentric model of our solar system. However, had Alberigo had the fortune of just a few more sheets of paper, we all know who would get credit today. Galileo was nothing more than a private tutor of the Medici family himself, who must have simply finished what Ameris had started. For that reason, I see no reason why anyone could properly disapprove of a name derived from that of Americi, the discoverer, a man of sagacious genius. A suitable form would be the Americi heliocentric model of the universe. Update. Some additional handwritten notes of the famous explorer were thought to have been rediscovered in 2021, below the temple of his uncle's monastery of San Marco in their hometown of Florence, Italy. Tourists are convinced that Amerigo's concept of the cosmos must have come to him, presumably by God himself, at that very place, hidden in plain sight and located directly beneath the sacred chamber below the main altar. Scratched on the side of the southwest-most facing wall of the laboratory catty corner, to the easternmost defecation hole, it appears the sagacious genius must have created what can only be described as a perfect depiction of the cosmos. Tourists believe that his concept of the cosmos must have come to him right there crouching over that easternmost defecation hole, known by Amerigo himself as the Drapedius hole, the one hole where he never missed.
On behalf of the king, Don Fernando, and of Doña Juana I, his daughter, Queen of Castile, and Leon, subduers of the barbarous nations, we, their servants, notify and make known to you, as best we can, that the Lord our God, living and eternal, created the heaven and the earth, and one man and one woman, of whom you and we, all the men of the world at the time, were and are descendants, and all those who came after and before us, but on account of the multitude which has sprung from this man and woman in the 5,000 or even more years since the world was created, it was necessary that some men should go one way and some another, and that they should be divided into many kingdoms and provinces, for in one alone they could not be sustained. Of all these nations, God our Lord gave charge to one man called Saint Peter, that he should be Lord and superior of all the men in the world, that all should obey him, and that he should be the head of the whole human race, wherever men should live, and under whatever law, sect, or belief they should be. And he gave him the world for his kingdom and jurisdiction, and he commanded him to place his seat in Rome, as the spot most fitting to rule the world from, but also he permitted him to have his seat in any other part of the world, and to judge and govern all Christians, Moors, Jews, Gentiles, and all other sects. This man was called Pope, Papa, as if to say, admirable great father and governor of men. The men who lived in that time obeyed that saint, Peter, and took him for Lord, King, and superior of the universe. So also they have regarded the others who after him have been elected to the pontificate, and so has it been continued even till now, and will continue till the end of the world. One of these pontiffs, who succeeded that saint, Peter as Lord of the world, in the dignity and seat which I have before mentioned, made donation of these isles and terra firma to the aforesaid king and queen, and to their successors, our lords, with all that there are in these territories, as is contained in certain writings which passed upon the subject as aforesaid, which you can see if you wish. So their highnesses are kings and lords of these islands, and the land of terra firma, by virtue of this donation. And some islands, and indeed almost all those to whom this has been notified, have received and served their highnesses as lords and kings, in the way that subjects ought to do, with good will, without any resistance, immediately, without delay, when they were informed of the aforesaid facts. And also they received and obeyed the priests whom their highnesses sent to preach to them and to teach them our holy faith. And all these, of their own free will, without any reward or condition, have become Christians, and are so, and their highnesses have joyfully and benignantly received them, and also have commanded them to be treated as their subjects and vassals, and you too are held and obliged to do the same. Wherefore, as best we can, we ask and require you that you consider what we have said to you, that you take the time that shall be necessary to understand and deliberate upon it, and that you acknowledge the Church as the ruler and superior of the whole world, and the high priest called Pope, and in his name the King and Queen Doña Juana our lords, in his place, as superiors and lords and kings of these islands, and this terra firma by virtue of the said donation, and that you consent and give place that these religious fathers should declare and preach to you the aforesaid. If you do so, you will do well, and that which you are obliged to do to their highnesses. And we in their name shall receive you in all love and charity, and shall leave you, your wives and your children and your lands, free without servitude, that you may do with them and with yourselves freely that which you like and think best, and they shall not compel you to turn Christians, unless you yourselves, when informed of the truth, should wish to be converted to our holy Catholic faith, as almost all the inhabitants of the rest of the islands have done. And besides this, their highnesses will award you many privileges and exemptions, and will grant you many benefits. But if you do not do this, and maliciously make delay in it, I certify to you that, with the help of God, we shall powerfully enter into your country, and shall make war against you in all ways and manners that we can, and shall subject you to the yoke and obedience of the Church and of their highnesses. We shall take you and your wives and your children, and shall make slaves of them, and as such shall sell and dispose of them as their highnesses may command, and we shall take away your goods, and shall do you all the mischief and damage that we can, as to vassals who do not obey, and refuse to receive their lord, and resist and contradict him. And we protest that the deaths and losses which shall accrue from this are your fault, and not that of their highnesses, or ours, nor of these cavaliers who come with us. And that we have said this to you, and made this requisition, we request the notary here present to give us his testimony in writing, and we ask the rest who are present that they should be witnesses of this requisition.
Dear Roman Catholic Church, I am writing you on behalf of a little boy from Amerigo, Nicaragua. On April 5th, 1523, his ancestor and heroine Nicarao asked a chain of questions in direct response to receiving official notification of the Spanish requirement of 1513 from the representative and messenger Captain Davila, sent on behalf of the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church by the Catholic monarchs, whom served him notice. Despite the absurdity of the Spanish requirement of 1513, and the undeniable God complex of its authors, Nicarao did exactly as the requirement of 1513 so barbarically and rudely demanded, that he and his people convert to the Holy Catholic faith, rulers of the universe, and that you acknowledge the Church as the ruler and superior of the whole world, and the high priest called Pope, and in his name the King and Queen, Doña Juana, our lords, in his place as superiors and lords and kings of these islands and this tierra firme by virtue of the said donation, and that you consent and give place that these religious fathers should declare and preach to you the aforesaid. Nicarao did exactly as the requirement of 1513. Here is a summary of his actions and inquiries. The Cacique answered the message by sending 4 of his principals to say that he accepted friendship for the sake of peace and would accept the new faith if it seemed as good to him as they praised it. And in the sunny morning of April 5th, 1523, Captain Davila ordered his troops to march in order with their 4 horses forward and flags down. To the sound of trumpets and kettle drums, they went to meet the great chief, who welcomed them and accommodated them in the homes reserved for his nobles. He gave them a sum of gold equivalent to 100,000 pesos castellanos, or more than 12 million current U.S. dollars, the largest contribution offered to the foreign guests up until that time. In return, Captain Davila gave Nicaragua a silk suit, a linen shirt, and a red cap. For 2 or 3 days, the chief and the captain held a conversation about earthly and heavenly things. According to Martir de Angleria, the chief asked the captain 11 questions. 1. Regarding a past cataclysm that had drowned the earth with all men and animals, if another one, the flood, would come. 2. If ever the earth would turn face up. 3. Of the general end of the human lineage, last common ancestor, and of the whereabouts destined for the souls when they leave the prison of the body. Of the state of the fire that one day will send when the sun, the moon, and other stars will cease to illuminate. Of the movement, quantity, distance, and effects of the stars, and many other things. 4. Regarding the cause of the blowing of the winds, heat and cold, and the variety of days and nights. 5. If you can without shame eat, drink, beget, sing, dance, and exercise in arms. 6. What they should do to please that God of which the man Davila preached as the author of all things. Due to the disagreement expressed regarding the deprivation of their right to bear arms and their right to exercise war, the chief asked. 7. Where should they throw their darts, their golden helmets, their bows and their arrows, their elegant war gear, and their magnificent military standards? Reasoning, should we give this to the women so they can manage it? Will we the men begin to spin with their uses? And will we cultivate the land rustically? 8. About the mystery of the cross and the utility of worshiping it. 9. About the distribution of days and activities according to Christian doctrine, a copy of the Christian calendar. Martir de Angleria himself reveals 2 more questions addressed by the chief to the interpreter. 10. If these wise people the Spanish came of by way of the sky, if the Spaniards had arrived from their foreign land by means of celestial navigation. 11. If so, had they come downwind and lower latitude in a lines, rum lines, circles, great circles, or by forming arcs, as Lopez de Gomara, chronicler of the Pope, would later write, Captain Davila could not resolve all that corpus of cosmological and anthropological questions. The chronicler further explains, while Davila is a man of genius and fond of reading books translated from Latin, he did not have the necessary erudition to give another answer about them. In conclusion, Gomara astutely points out that never has any Indian, as far as I can see, spoken like he does to our Spanish. At the conclusion of their philosophical debate, that lasted 2 or 3 days' time, in which the Cacique did as the Spanish requirement demanded, and dedicated himself to understand and deliberate upon the teachings of the Christians, in addition to present them with his questions. Subsequently, the Cacique agreed to be baptized with his family and 9,017 of his people. He also agreed to erect a cross on a stepped mound on the Orca Lobo, possibly the sacrificial altar, which he carried out, followed by his entourage in a solemn procession, an act that moved the Spaniards themselves. It was up to the Mercedarian friar Diego de Aguero, the only religious of the expedition, to rain holy water on the thousands of heads of the new converts who obediently imitated the strange rite to which their Lord apparently underwent. The significance of the questions asked by Cacique Nicarao and recorded by the Spanish were of no consequence at the time, and little was known of their existence outside the Catholic Church until the last century. However, once discovered, more than a few influential scholars have written about the words of the infamous Cacique and its content. Here are a few of those voices. Through the Cacique's questionnaire, the acuity and wisdom appear very summarized, since the chroniclers, although admiring the indigenous philosopher, do not copy his talks, replies, and counter-replies, but rather the short list of some of his questions. In them one notices, however, an extraordinary interest in knowing and understanding, plus a scientific curiosity in finding answers to the great problems of the men of their time and their relationship with the universe and nature. Ruben Dario more concrete was Constantine Lascaris, who above all confirms the adjective of philosopher to the Cacique and does not doubt the authenticity of the questions, since they correspond to the animistic level of his people and respond to three concerns: information about the Spanish, information about their God, and the last two, which asked for information about the status of their people when they depend on the rule of the Spanish. And he adds that the dialogue in question must be read based on the requirement Constantine Lascaris. Focusing his attention on some of the questions, Jaime Inser observes, Captain Davila could not answer the Cacique's questions. In cosmological aspects, Europe at the beginning of the 16th century still accepted Ptolemy's geocentric model. As a paradox, the calculation of time was less precise in the Old World than that inherited by various Amerindian groups like the wise astronomers of Copan, and he points out the aspect pointed out by Dario. The indigenous people also objected to everything that prevented dancing and drunkenness, arguing that such acts did not harm anyone. In reality, both actions were an important part of the Indian liturgy itself. Jaime Inser, he is not simply a curious chief, he notes, or suspicious or friendly. He knew that he would have to go to war. But first, prudently, he agreed to listen to the other and try and understand them, giving an example and a lesson. An example of intelligent openness and a lesson in rational defense. Allying himself with the neighboring chief as powerful as he preferred strategic reflection rather than the direct warlike action, but dignified and proud of Diriangan. There is a reason why the chronicler Herrera calls this chief a valiant warrior, and Lopez de Gomara defines Nicaragua as sharp and wise in his rites and antiquities. In the subsequent decades, only a handful of historians and theologians have studied in detail the words of Cacique Nicarao and his line of questioning. However, it appears never have his words been studied by even a part-time sea captain with a rudimentary understanding of navigation and its history. Nearly every translation of his question number 10, which reads, Si esta gente tan sabia, los españoles venían del cielo, has been dubiously translated as, if these wise people, the Spaniards, came from heaven. However, the Spanish phrase del cielo has two related yet distinct meanings, from heaven and from the sky. For instance, if I was to say, ayer fui impactado por el excremento de un pájaro que cayó del cielo. Yesterday I was struck by bird droppings that fell from the sky. Clearly, my words should not be interpreted as the bird shit came from heaven, but rather from above or from the sky. Likewise, the preposition del can have more than one meaning depending on context, the most common being from thee and of thee. If you simply switch the word cielo, sky, with the word mar, sea, in question number 10 would then mean if these wise men came from the sea. In the same way, this question would never be interpreted so literally as to mean they were some kind of sea creatures that emerged from the sea, but rather that they came by way of the sea. Therefore, the same must be applied to Cacique Nicarau's question number 10. However, question number 11 makes it crystal clear what Cacique Nicarau meant by del cielo in his previous question. The follow-up question number 11 reads, if so, had they come down in straight line, in circles, or by forming arcs? In the realm of celestial navigation, there are two proven methods in which to navigate the open ocean celestially: by determining your geographic position with a level of accuracy not too divergent from that its modern GPS counterpart. They are known as rum lines and great circle navigation. I can understand why the Spaniards present in 1523, as well as why even modern historians and theologians do not understand the meaning and intent behind his question 11. Historians and theologians spend their time in libraries and churches. However, I do not. Before Sputnik and the advent of the modern GPS, which uses man-made satellites in order to triangulate its and your exact geographic position, ancient men had to use natural celestial satellites and bodies, namely the moon and a couple dozen navigational stars, to do the exact same thing. However, you must first understand that our moon is a satellite of Earth and that the sun is not. In other words, you must understand a heliocentric model of the universe. Cacique Nicarau was recording his people's advanced knowledge of science and the cosmos in the guise of religious questions. He was speaking truth to power. He was telling the self-proclaimed rulers of the universe that he knew more about the universe than they. All of his questions were rhetorical, and due to his sagacious genius, he was able to record what he needed in plain sight by and authored by the hand of the enemy, knowing it would go back to vault of the Vatican. He tricked the Spaniards because he understood their weakness, their greed. That is precisely why he gave them millions of dollars of gold, a sum that may have exceeded $36 million US dollars, in order to do it. And then just days later, he attacked the same people he gave tens of millions of dollars to, did not repossess his gold, and ran them off like unwanted dogs, and is recorded as saying, "Run fast, undesired." Anyone who is still unconvinced of my new theory need look no further than his name, Nicarau, now known to be a pseudonym. This was not the cacique's real name. He made this name up. It was a code name or a mission name used in order to fulfill its intended purpose, with a hidden message decipherable by only his comrades and his people, and not the Spaniards. He knew that the Spaniards and their ego and their affinity for personal titles make them completely naive to the opposite. Where a well-respected man, a king or cacique, would use a nickname and not real name or title, a concept that many Europeans still cannot comprehend. In the Amerindian world of Nicaragua, a man is judged by his actions, and authority is gained via referent and expert power, and not by his positional or coercive power like his European counterparts. To the illuminated American Indian power derived valor and prudence, and not from the senseless Neanderthal ideas of class, wealth, and religious delusions. The European system incentivizes people to marry for money, convenience, and power, which is precisely why the monarchs of Europe would so often beg the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church to allow them to marry their cousin, sister, or other close relative, which could only be authorized by the Pope for a nominal fee. This system breeds leaders of inferior inbred genetics, which manifest themselves in psychological tendencies of narcissism, God complex, and ultimately pedophilia. Nicarau's and the American Indian system conversely created and still creates leaders with the genetic superior hero gene who are biologically predisposed to psychological tendencies of valor, prudence, and incredible stories of heroism. Look no further than all the brave Indian warriors and leaders that are venerated around him. Look at the map. Do the heroes of Europe cluster on the map like this? His name, Nicarau, in the language of the culture known to have inhabited the very same place previously, means, see what the arrow is. He was attempting to shoot down their concept of divine authority by fracturing it with superior understanding. In less than 20 years, old Copernicus would get credit for the first heliocentric model of the universe. However, Nicarao was recorded first. Pre-Columbian artifacts from the ground prove it as well. This would not be the first or last time the Europeans took credit for achievements that they did not deserve credit, Goodyear and Darwin to name just two: the modern sailboat, democracies, BBQ. A book is coming soon to dispel the myths. What else possibly could I know? My advice: prepare for the worst, because that's what I do. That is what a leader and a hero does. He is willing to sacrifice himself and his possessions for the betterment of his people. He does not kill or sacrifice for the opposite. Sincerely, Captain Ninas, aka Archbishop Billy Thunderballs, the Barbarian Holy Order of Karma America,